Oh, hello. Welcome to Mod 2 Overview. So, by the end of this lesson, you will not be able to do any new things because it's not really a lesson. The purpose of this is we're trying to give you a conceptual overview of what we're spending the next 2 weeks doing. You should not be able to do any of the things in this yet. Should not be able to do any of the things in this yet. Shouldn't you really be able to do any of this kind of stuff already? So if you come out of this going like, well, I didn't learn anything out of that, that's part of the point. I'm trying to give you an idea of how all the little pieces we're going to do, like for example, the Rails you'll be doing with Kat this afternoon, these labs you're doing, trying to see how they fit into the bigger picture. Questions about that before we take off? Yep.
Did we skip the rack and Sinatra lessons?
Yep. Intentionally. I don't care if anybody here can do Rack or Sinatra. So we yanked that out. We're skipping right to Rails.
Those are just kind of like older forms of Rails, right? Well, Sinatra is like.
No, Sinatra came later. So Rack is a building block. Like Rails uses Rack. We just don't use it directly. Sinatra is an unopinionated approach to doing the same thing.
Okay.
So for pretty much any type of technology, we have opinionated versions of them and unopinionated. Any guesses what I mean by that? Opinionated versus unopinionated?
So like Rails kind of forces you to do it a particular way.
Yep.
Like Node gives you more freedom.
Yes. So Rails, you have to do everything the Rails way. However, if you do everything the Rails way, you get a whole bunch of stuff for free right out of the box, batteries included. Unopinionated stuff, like Sinatra, gives you nothing for free, but burdens you with very little also. You can write your app however you want to, without any extra baggage. This is pretty much pure baggage, but we got a whole bunch of goodies for free out of that. Cool. Other questions about what we're doing before we get started? Cool. Let's dive in. So Mod 2 is really about full stack development. So we kind of got our feet wet in programming in the last mod, made those command line apps. Now we're doing huge shift over to the purpose of this program, full stack web development. And these are going to be our little building blocks, and we're going to spend the rest of the program kind of building on those. So what do we mean by full stack? So you have applications that run in your browser. You have parts of those applications that run on servers, and they talk to each other with a technology called, anybody know? Todd gets it. HTTP. We send each other little messages. I do some stuff in my browser. I send a message over here. They do some stuff. They send it back to me. One of the server's main jobs is talking to databases. This diagram we are going to spend an awful lot of time with over these 15 weeks of ours. Some of the application runs here, some of the application runs here. We got some data stored here. Everybody talks to each other. By the end of this module, you will be able to do these things. So let's talk about what the first one of these looks like. This is where we're going to start in Mod 2, the APIs. So somebody give me a noun. What's something we're going to build an app with? Dogs? All right. This is going to be called the Derulo Kennel Club. RVM use 2.6. Rails new API Derulo Kennel Club. So what's going to happen is I get all of these files, all of the stuff that I need to structure the data for my Derulo Kennel Club app. If I hop into that, look at all these files! Files on files on files on files. I didn't have to do anything. I got all this stuff for free. Of course, now I have to understand all this stuff, but this is the opinionated side of this. We also, and this is kind of neat, get a bunch of built-in commands for free. So I can say things like, hey Rails, generate a model for me called dog. And it goes, okay. Here's your dog. And if I go, hey Rails, generate a controller for me called dogs, it goes, okay, here you go. Now if I hop into this dog model that it made me, hey now, this is starting to look a little familiar. This is starting to look a little Mod 1-ish. If I look at this migration, hey, wait a minute! We just did this stuff. So I can make a database table, maybe give the dog a name, and now I have a dog model. I can do dog.create, dog.destroy all. It's a little grim, but I can do all the things that we need to do with dogs. I even have seeds. I got a seeds file. So if I do dog.create Bixby, dog.create Mesa. I'm going to throw Stephanie into the litter here also. Cool. That was supposed to be Mesa. There we go. All right, so I've got a dogs migration. I got some dog seeds. This should be at least a little bit familiar from Mod 1. Now I can do Rails DB migrate. Pow! I got a table. I can do Rails DB seed. Pow! I've got dogs in the database. Magical. Now, whole point of this is I've got to be able to take in an HTTP request, look up some dogs, maybe add some dogs, send a message back. So that's where that controller comes in. So if I go over here and say, hey, if I make a method called index and I want it to list all the dogs and respond with them, it would probably look something kind of like that. Now, to actually listen to the request coming in, I might do something like any GET request that comes in for dogs, I want you to send it to the dogs controllers index route. All right, if I run this app, which I can do with Rails S, see, localhost 3000, you say. Localhost 3000 / dogs. Womp womp. Oops. Did those backwards. Render JSON. There we go. So now, if I run that server, cool. I get my dogs back. Hey, this is just kind of like those API integrations we were doing in Mod 1 also, except we made the API. We can also add dogs, we can update dogs, we can do all of the things that we were learning about in Mod 1. But all these together are the API part of this. So, granting that none of you know how to do any of those things that I just did, conceptually, how this fits into the big picture, what questions do you have? Yep.
So is Rails, so Rails we would consider like the back end, but would that also be considered the server? Is the server synonymous with back end, or?
Great question. Backend is going to be the server and the database. Rails
Okay.
is going to be this box here. In fact, the thing that we just did, that request came into the router. It sent it to a controller. Controller looked something up on the model. Model made the request to the database, got the thing back, sent it back to the controller, and then the controller fired that off. So all that was Rails.
Wait, so the controller works between the server and the database?
It's part of the server.
It's,
All the little blue scribbles that I just did, that's all Rails.
Okay.
We are not doing any server things right now that are not Rails. So Rails and servers are not synonymous, but may as well be for you right now. Other questions about how the Legos snap together on this? Yeah.
So the route tells you which controller to go here.
That's exactly what it does. Little traffic cop. Other questions? So let's talk about the browser side of this. So we're going to start by making websites. If I kill this Derulo Kennel Club, I'm going to make a, we'll call this a client. And I'm going to make an HTML file and a CSS file and a gerbil script file. If I go to the index.html file, whoever tinker around with websites, use GeoCities, something old timey. Oh, all right. So this is everything you see in a browser. All this stuff is all HTML and CSS. So HTML and CSS kind of looks like this. It's not a programming language. It's called a markup language. Come on. It's a way to describe some data. So I have a couple tags that we have to describe what this page should look like. It needs to have a title. Derulo Kennel Club meta char set. Cool. And then if I say Derulo Kennel Club we got dogs. This is enough to describe a web page. I'll prove it. So if I run this, hey, I got a web page. Now, not a very good looking web page, certainly doesn't do very much, but we can fix that. We have the power. So if I hop into that CSS file that I made, how about I, change the font on the page. Oh, thank you so much. I've practiced. All right. I'm going to say the whole page should use Verdana instead. And it'll listen to me because I tell the HTML page that it should. Awesome. If I serve this up, it should look a little different. Hey, it kind of looks a little different. So how we write those tags, how we make them look different, how we make something look like this, that's HTML and CSS. And that is running in the browser. Oops. And that is this part. Questions about how that fits into this ecosystem we're building?
Yes.
Hit me.
You created those files inside of your Rails directory, and is it
Yes.
considered front end still?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, where the files are, who gives a shit?
Okay.
What they're doing is the important
So
part.
the separation between front end and back end is not so much like where the files are. Like all the files can be.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
Where they're running, that's the important part.
Where they run at. Okay.
Yeah. Cool, what else? All right. So let's skip ahead to this fetch one right here. It's a dogs app. Fetch. Get it? Stop trying to make fetch a thing. I'm only going to make that joke about 45 more times in the next 2 weeks, so don't worry about it. Let's talk about how we connect these. How do I tell the browser, yo, I'd like you to make a request over to this server? I show it to you. So over in that index.html file, what if I said, hey, I'd like you to, I got a script for you, got some instructions I'd like you to follow. They're in this file. Then, over in that file, I could say, hey, I want you to fetch HTTP localhost 3000 dogs. After you've done that, I'd like you to take the response, and the response is going to come back in a file format called JSON. I'd like you to take that JSON and make it regular JavaScript objects. And then I'd like you to take the response, that parsed response, and now I've got some buddies in response.dogs. Cool. So I should be able to run that server, run the HTML and CSS, and I should see that list of dogs, Bixby, Mesa, and Stephanie. I should see that come back in my browser. So we'll say this is the server. Say this is the client. Ooh, and one other thing I got to do for the server. This is like, yeah, I guess that client can talk to me. Sometimes Rails is fussy about that for security purposes. It's exactly why you'd want something to be fussy. But if I serve up Rails S, nice. Oops, is it mad at me? That's fine. And then if I go into that client that I made, serve up in here, if I look inside this console, buddies! Bixby, Mesa, Stephanie, my friends. So I have successfully taken this stuff, made a request over here, looked up stuff in the database, and given it back to us. Hell yeah. So, doesn't do us a whole lot of good if it's hanging out over here in developer land. If I want to show this app to my friends, I can't say, look in the console, the whole app is there. I want these dogs to show up on the page. So I got a trick for that. If I go over in this app.js, instead of just logging those buddies, what if I turned them into HTML elements? What if I said response.dogs.map? Hey, wait a minute, map. We know how that works. We take a list of things, we map over it, we take individual things, we turn them into new things. Cool.
What's the deal with that arrow pointy thing?
It's called a fat arrow.
Fat arrow.
And you're about to fall in love with it. It's a function.
That's an arrow function? Is that okay.
Correct. In Ruby terms, that would be a block. So I'm going to make an element. So was there a question over there? I'm going to make an HTML element. I'm going to set its text content to dog.name. And then in Ruby, all your stuff gets like magically returned if it's just the last line or whatever. That's not the case in JavaScript or most languages. They use that return keyword. All right, so I call this dog items. Cool. Now I need to put all those dog items on the page. And so I'll say dog items for each, which is just like each was in Ruby. For each of them, I gotta have something to put them in. Let's head back over to that HTML page. Give these dogs a forever home. That is precisely what it does. Couldn't have put it better myself. Document dot query selector. Come on. Dogs. For each of these dogs, I want to add them to the page. All right, moment of truth. If I did this right, hey, look who's on the page now. What? So, these dogs live in this database. I got HTML, some HTML and CSS. I used a little bit of JavaScript to send a request over to Rails. Rails went through this maze, looked the stuff up in the database, gave them back to me, and JavaScript helped me add them to my HTML and CSS. So now we got that. And that is correct. And that JavaScript, so we fetched the stuff, generating that HTML. Why, that's called DOM manipulation. And we did a little bit of JavaScript in the process. And all this working over networks, that's the web and the internet. There's one last thing that we have to be able to do by the end of Mod 2. So before I talk about it, conceptual questions about what we've done so far. Yeah, Jack. Nope. jQuery was an older technology for doing a lot of this kind of stuff, and it did probably the highest thing that a technology can aspire to. It made itself obsolete. It just won. All the things that we used to need jQuery for are just part of the language now. So don't really need it anymore.
So when you fetch something, you are getting, you're pulling down, can you just give a brief description description of what fetching is?
Sure.
Maybe like no code, just conceptually.
So when two computers need to talk to each other, they need a common language. One common language is HTTP. Fetch is a way for one computer to send an HTTP message to another computer. And when that computer gets the message, it can do things like look stuff up, and it can respond to that message with whatever it found, also using HTTP. So we'd say that if another computer has something I want, I can send a fetch request to that computer, and then as part of that process.
Is fetch language specific?
Yeah,
JavaScript.
correct. Yeah, Todd.
Why wouldn't you just write the HTML yourself? Why do you have to use JavaScript?
That's a great question. So why wouldn't I just write Bixby, Mesa, Stephanie? That accomplishes the exact same thing. In fact, I'll probably see them twice in there now. Yep. So why go to all this hassle of looking it up on another computer? It's dynamic. So I can have 100 different people looking at this. They all see the same thing. One of them adds a dog. Everybody refreshes. Now we all see the new one. I didn't have to write a new HTML file. The database keeps it dynamic. And down the road, we can also do things like, well, I only want to see my dogs. The page should still fundamentally be the same thing, but maybe 100 different people are seeing 100 different lists of dogs here. That's why we do it. Yeah?
Is fetch one of those things that's going to be more JavaScript specific? Like, in other words, are we going to be using an equivalent in another language? If, let's say I were doing like a...
You already have. If any of you used REST client in Mod 1, fetch is the JavaScript version of REST client.
Okay. But we didn't do much manipulating of HTML with REST client, right?
So that's the DOM and JavaScript part of this.
Right.
Instead of doing this, we could have just taken those dogs and also used a command line app. You could write a REST client thing for this little dogs Rails thing that we just did and use it in a command line app. We could also use it in a web app. Same data, many uses. Other questions about conceptually how all the Lego pieces snap together? Okay, one more thing. So the fetch that we did went over here, looked some stuff up, we got the stuff out of it, we sent it back. Cool. Now, what if the browser needs to be able to add things to the database? We got you covered there too. So let's say I add a form to this HTML page of ours, and it has an input for text and make a placeholder. It says dog name goes here. Then we add a submit button. Like so. All right, so now I have this form, and I should be able to enter a name like Ted in here and see it get added to that list. So what I'll say is, I would like you to send a post HTTP request to HTTP localhost 3000/. Dogs. Cool. And then over here, a GET request to dogs should take me there. A POST request to dogs should take me here. Dogs controllers create action. So if I go over to that dogs controller and make an action and I call it create, I can say, hey, make me a new dog. Should have a name. I send it to you as the name. And then once you've done that, I want you to redirect me back to HTTP localhost 2001. It's mad about something. Oop, it's because that's a method. Neat. So my form is going to send a dog name over here. It's going to get added to the database. And then this message back is like, hey, I did this. Go ahead and go to this page. Essentially just tells the browser to refresh. So if I did all that correctly, she'll say TED and hit enter. Oop. Something didn't work.
You just say 3001 there for localhost?
That's exactly what it needs to do. No, that should be 3000. My client is 3001.
Can you explain that real quick?
I will in a sec.
Is it because the name that says name should not be the ID user?
No, that's not it. Shoot. Jared, do you see it? So I'm on 3001 there. See, it's
Our action method flip?
they 100% are. Monday for everybody. Did those backwards. Thank you. All right, so
What shortcut did you use to delete that whole?
a Vim shortcut. There we go. All right, now Ted's on the list. And I add Kelsey to the list. Cool. So we have made a dynamic full stack web app. So I imagine many of you are probably going, holy shit. It's 2 weeks. 2 weeks we have to learn how to do that. Whole lot of things can happen in 2 weeks. A lot of you are barely proficient computer operators at the beginning of the program. Still made fully functional apps by the end of, and you passed code challenges and all that sort of stuff. So this isn't any different. This is a ton though. There's lots of stuff, but we'll get through it. Lots of people before you have, you will too. Cool, hit me with some questions.
Which segments would you say are like the hardest for people to regularly?
Ooh, that's a great question. The hard parts of this are going to be 3, 4, and 5 here. JavaScript, DOM manipulation, and fetching. The API stuff, we'll spend a couple days on it, but I'm not too terribly worried about that. Websites aren't even technically a part of the Flatiron curriculum, but they're crazy important, so we spent a little bit of time talking about those. Forms, we'll do this very briefly. There's really not a whole lot to it, and we're going to learn a different way to do it in Mod 3. Web and internet, very heady and conceptual, so we're going to scratch at that a little bit and then go deeper in Mod 3. The rough stuff is going to be those three there, probably especially JavaScript. As a sense of like timing, if we're kind of in this neighborhood or so by the end of this week, I'd feel good about that. I want to spend a couple days on APIs, day or two on websites. Yeah, by the end of the week, we should be about waist deep in JavaScript, maybe scratching at the DOM a little bit. I'd say that's pretty good pacing. And then probably we'll get to forms Wednesday, Thursday or so next week. Great question. What else?
What's the goal of this mod as it relates to either the code challenge, what we should be expected to be able to do for that, or
Wonderful.
the project at the end of the mod?
Cool. So the thing that I just did, it's basically the code challenge. There's a couple other things to it, but not really. Code challenge is given some resource, can you put it on a server, offer it up as an API, make a request from a browser app, make it show up on a page, add stuff. I think that's all you have to do for the code challenge. There's like one or two other tricks to that, but that's basically it. As far as your projects, similar kind of thing. You want to be able to make an app that relies on dynamic data from a database. So all those Mod 3 projects you saw, Mod 3 is really part 2 of this mod. You're making crappier versions of the projects that you saw on Friday. What else? Yeah.
What are the most important concepts from like Mod 1 that we should feel confident in, like for Mod 2?
Sure. Enumerables are huge. Not even just for mods 1 and 2, like for the rest of your programming career. So like mapping through something you got back from a fetch and then eaching it into the DOM and like those kinds of things. That should be second nature to you by this point.
So does JavaScript have their own version of all those enumerables?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
Type something.
Yep, almost every language is going to have some kind of map, some kind of reduce, some kind of select. Like JavaScript is called filter, but it does the same thing. So those you want to have pretty solid. Another thing you'll get a lot of mileage out of from Mod 1 is active record stuff. So that's going to manage all of our database communication. So active record will take you a long way. And then the other like Mod 1 thing that I think will help a lot is Ruby syntax. You can write the exact same thing in Ruby a lot of different ways. So if I go over here, I could have done this like that. I could have also done this like this. I could have done this like this. I could have done this like this. Ruby is way loosey-goosey on syntax, and there's a lot of stuff in Rails that looks very magical, but it fundamentally kind of isn't. For example, take this. Looks like stuff that we really haven't seen before until I add all the other syntax back in. Okay, well that's just a method call, and it takes a string and a hash as an argument. So I know that not everybody's all the way there yet, but being able to look at that and sort of like mentally translate to that, that'll take you a long way in Rails in particular. It's not because you have to, it's because it's the Rails way. So every example, every doc, every tutorial you see is gonna write it like this. And if you get a job and you try to write this with the parentheses and the braces, people are gonna look at you cross-eyed.
What do you think the best way for us to start realizing those connections is? Like, I don't know that it would have been intuitive for me to figure out that that's what that actually.
Sure. So I'd say the best strategy is learn it the way that it's being taught to you in the Learn Lab, in the lesson, whatever. But when you get confused, like I don't know how this would break down. See if you can predict where the things would be, and you know if you did it right, if you can add all of those things back in and it still works, because they don't make a difference to the execution of the program. Yep.
So I noticed that Rails is generating a lot of like your models and things
Yes.
for you, but you still have to set up like the relationships yourself, right?
Correct. Oh yeah, that's another thing that'll come in handy for Mod 1, is we did this with just a dog model. We could have had dogs and owners, and there could be a many-to-many relationship there, and like, it's not any different, but will come in handy.
Would we be able to probably set that up without another lesson, just knowing what we know about active record?
Probably gonna need some handholding on that, is my guess. But I love being surprised. Other questions about what we're doing in Mod 2? Yeah?
Are we going into different databases, or are we still using SQLite?
We'll probably mostly be using SQLite. It might kick you guys over to Postgres at some point. Big difference, really the only difference for us in Rails, is that the SQLite databases are files, so you can throw them up on GitHub. You can share them with people super easily. A Postgres database is a running process on your computer. It's a little bit trickier. But your Rails code doesn't change at all. You go, never mind, I want to use Postgres instead. Or you can even generate your Rails app to start with Postgres instead of SQLite. But like, your models still work exactly the same way. Migrations are right in the same way.
What are the distinct advantages of like Postgres? Or something that's running on your computer? as
Sure.
opposed to a file?
So SQLite has 3 data types. Postgres has like 100. So we can do things like store geospatial coordinates in Postgres. We can even like query to like get things between these 2 coordinates or within this radius, and like we can do some cool shit like that. You can, so SQLite is just a file, which is kind of neat for like embedded systems, for example, like your car. If it's just a file, that's a lot easier to move around. It's a lot harder to make that enterprise scale, have copies of that all over the world, and have 3 copies of that, and there's a thing in front of it that makes sure that all of them are getting used so that nobody has a slow app. You can't do any of that shit with SQLite. It's not made for it. It's for fucking around with Derulo Kennel Club kind of apps. Postgres are like Siri. That's the one you'd want your bank to use.
So Postgres is really just probably ultimately in the long run a better thing to learn.
Yes.
As far as like, yeah.
Well, like learning SQLite 3 takes half an hour. It doesn't do anything, so there's not that much to it. All the SQL stuff that you learn in Mod 1, that works in SQLite 3, works in Postgres, works in MySQL, works in Oracle, works in all of them. That part's the same. There are some like differences between those different database systems. I wouldn't worry a ton about them right now. And the general like move in the industry is use Postgres until you have a reason not to. Cool. What else?
So the routes tell us what controller to go to.
And which action.
Okay.
When this method and this path come in through HTTP, send it to the dogs controllers, create action.
And then the controller has all the methods, right?
Exactly.
And then, okay, and then it goes to the controller, gets your model from the database, and then sends it back. That's
You got it. Cool. You should be teaching the Rails lesson at 1. Cool. Other questions about how this snaps together? Cool. So I think Kat's going to get you guys started with Rails at 1. Until then, my recommendation: go to the Flatiron site and start looking through these. We also have tons of videos on how to do stuff. So wake up, wake up, wake up. Any day now. All right. So if I look up Rails, that's a lot of videos. There's intro to Rails in there. If I look up APIs, forms, so much stuff. So between that and the labs, you should be able to stay busy for another hour or so. Elsewise, Kat will get you started at 1. Yep, Jack. Birthday boy. Yeah, don't worry about Sinatra or Rack. I don't care if you, like, if they're curious to you, I'm not going to tell you, like.
Are they just used by Rails, so like, using Rails?
Correct. We're approaching this from like, how about we just spend all that week we would have spent on Sinatra and Rack and shit and spend that actually doing the thing that we're going to do instead. Yeah, they're kind of like an interesting academic curiosity if like you immediately want to know more about what's behind the curtain, but I don't care if any of you do any of those labs. Cool. Anything else? Go and be well.